Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Turning Point Summit 2022. The Turning Point Summit is being hosted to celebrate the International Day of Nonviolence and Gandhi Jayanti, which is the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi ji. The summit is being hosted by the Youth Working Group of the World House Project and the DIAS, along with all our fantastic partners, colleagues, and friends from all our networks. So I thank you wholeheartedly on behalf of all the organizers for joining in. This is a very exciting day also because we have completed the 1 year anniversary of the World House project, I believe. So so before we go into further details of what the summit holds, we will be hearing from the founding director of the World House project, whose vision has led us to this day, Dr. Claiborne Carson. So, Dr. Carson, an introduction from you before we begin, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for organizing this meeting. It's really encouraging to see all the faces of. I think really encouraging that most of them are young. Some of them don't have gray hair like I have, and I always want to think that there's a new generation coming on to continue the struggle for justice and human rights into the future. So I think my message is fairly direct, and that is nonviolence is essential, but not sufficient. And what I mean by that is that I hope that on this day, we recall that the reason why we learn about nonviolence and practice nonviolence is that we've seen that it can change the world for the better. And I say that because I think it's very important to point out that the World House Project, by the way, is an idea that Martin Luther King developed. And he was looking into the future and saying that we all live in this world and we have to learn to live peacefully in a more just world. But he also said we have to build that world, that all of us are obligated because we live in it to make it a better place. And so I use that metaphor to remind us that nonviolence is not a solitary activity. Yes, you can practice nonviolence without interacting with other people. And in fact, that's probably the best way of staying nonviolent is just don't do anything in the world. But as I said, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And the idea of the World House Project and even the working group that you're a part of is to build networks. I've seen in my own life that coming together with other people with the same kinds of beliefs can be an effective way of changing the world. I've seen it in my lifetime, certainly in the American civil rights struggle. It was not simply that people went through nonviolence training and learned many of the lessons from Gandhi, but that they joined together in a struggle. And actually, my first book was about that struggle. It was led by people we call now freedom writers, who were willing to confront the evils of Southern segregation and eventually overcome the Jim Crow system in the South and get legislation passed that has changed American society. Similarly, in my lifetime, I've seen the anti-apartheid movement. Similarly, networking people around the world to, for the first time probably in human history, of changing a nuclear-powered nation, forcing it to change its racial policies and get rid of the apartheid system. That was a tremendous accomplishment, in both cases requiring decades of work. So I hope that particularly the young people who have decades left to do their work, will take this lesson and understand that there's not a moment to lose. If you are not now connected with other people who are also committed to nonviolence, you should be. A solitary nonviolent person is not a very effective in the struggle against injustice. So I hope that the network that Hishoff you've been able to build already, it's a slow process. It involves getting to know people, getting to trust people. And I think that you've made a great start. And so I hope that the lesson that comes out of this gathering is that it is a long struggle. When Martin Luther King said, "Where do we go from here?" I think he understood that he was talking about decades of work that would be necessary to bring about the world house he envisioned. So, so I think that you're at the beginning of that. I want to give you every encouragement I can. I'm willing to get up early in the morning in order to get this off to, I hope, a good start. So congratulations, and look forward to seeing more of these sessions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson, for your uplifting words. Again, like, it means a lot to us that you are here with us today, and you've given these opening remarks. We will be hearing from Dr. Carson at length in some more time as well. So please hold your questions for Dr. Carson for that session. I want to take everyone through a little bit about what we are doing at the Turning Point Summit. And as Dr. Carson just talked about, where do we go from here? Dr. King's important question. The Turning Point Summit is the origins of the summit itself, and the name itself is coming from that question. It's a question, and the passage in Dr. King's book where he talks about the World House Project. And what he talks about is the need for a turning point from his times, but the inspiration that we took was, with the current context of the global challenges, we need a turning point in our lives, in our communities, and in the world for a better future for all. So that is why this meeting has been organized, and we have been this youth working group within the World House Project is, again, as Dr. Carson mentioned, dedicated to bringing youth voices out, young people's leadership in this front out. And a lot of our summits work already, which has been going on for the last couple of months, has been heavily driven by young people. But that does not mean that it's only young people who are responsible for today's day. We also have our advisor, Dr. Johnny Mack, who has been instrumental in this entire process. All our other speakers who will be speaking today. So without further ado, I also just want to highlight a couple of points that this summit today, that we are celebrating the International Day of Nonviolence and Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. This is not just a one-day process, or, as we have talked about, a 6-day summit. It is a starting point of a movement which intends to, from now on, keep young people and all our stakeholders together, engaged, and the entire premise and the structure of the summit is dedicated to that. So the first 2 days of the summit, which is today and tomorrow, are dedicated to the Youth Assembly on Nonviolence, which will emerge tomorrow with a youth-led declaration on nonviolence, which is again already in shape, and tomorrow it will be presented by our inspiring young speakers. So tomorrow, again, I request all of you to please reconvene. Today we will be hearing from Dr. Lester Kurtz and Dr. Johnny Mack in a session moderated by Mike Selby, where we talk about the lessons we have learned from Gandhiji and Dr. King, who to me started their activism in their youth days, in their days of being young. We often see their pictures as those of older gentlemen, but I'm sure that they will also want the younger pictures to be sort of used to refer to them, not just their older pictures. So they were also quite young when they started out in their activism days. So that's our first session when we today. Thereafter, we have an inspiring conversation again with Dr. Carson, where again we will be hearing more from him. Uh, After that, the final session, we have two more sessions today, which is one of them is an inspiring youth-led panel. We have astounding and inspiring four speakers from four different parts of the world who will be talking about their journeys, their perspectives in nonviolent action. And again, it's a super inspiring session. And finally, we will be looking at going inside ourselves and talking about what is the one thing that we will do from this summit towards nonviolence and peace, towards shaping a nonviolent world. We had initially emailed everyone about that session as well, so we will be having an interactive discussion. So that's day 1 and 2 of the assembly. Day three of the Turning Point Summit and day 4 will be dedicated to a workshop on nonviolence and human rights and social change, led by Dr. Johnny Mack. Again, which the idea is to build a foundation, a common context for learning what nonviolence is and how we can manifest it in our respective lives, and to re-look at nonviolence other than simply the traditional understanding that many people have of a passive way of acting. So that's going to be a very critical session, and we will be closing the summit with 2 days of a youth co-creation session, where young people have been working together already from the summit to create a youth-led strategy for young people to engage on non-violence. So that will be on the 6th and 7th of October. And the whole idea is from this foundational declaration that will come out tomorrow, to looking and connecting it with the actions that can follow in, and the entire conclusions of this is what the youth working group will also be working with round the year. And the conclusions is something that we will be reconvening with in the coming days over several things. So it's not just, again, as I mentioned, today or these 6 days, but the real after the trailer of this movie, the real deal, the real journey starts, I think, once the summit concludes. So without now taking any more speaker time, I will be now inviting for our first session our moderator, Mike Selby, and he will do a great job introducing himself. So I did not want to take that opportunity to introduce him. Mike, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Keshav. Good morning or good evening or good afternoon, everybody, wherever you're from. My name is Mike Selby. I'm in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia in Canada, and it's a bit earlier than it is here for Dr. Carson. So let's get started. Myself, I'm a civil rights journalist, librarian. I share my office with a bunch of different people, so I have puppets and books and everything behind me, and an author of civil rights textbooks. And welcome, everybody. And I just want to say that nonviolence, as I understand it, it's the most important act in human history. So you guys are hitting it at the right age and right time. And we have two keynote speakers, which I will introduce. The first is Dr. Lester Kurtz. He's the editor of the Encyclopedia of Violence, Peace, and Conflict, and dozens of other books he's contributed to. He's currently working on a book on Gandhi's Paradox, 2 edited volumes on women, war, and violence, another of the Paradox of Repression, and a project called Peaceful Warriors. Dr. Kurtz has lectured in Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America, and served as chair of the Peace Studies Association and the Peace, War, and Social Conflict section of the American Sociological Association, which recently awarded him its Robin Williams Distinguished Career Award. Our other keynote speaker is Dr. Johnny Mack. He's the Associate Director of the World House Project at Stanford University, Martin Luther King Jr. Institute. He's the former director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change and the Nelson Mandela Family Foundation president. He studies and writes on social movements, social change, and human development. He holds a doctorate from Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. He has traveled extensively throughout the Americas, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Asia. working in peace, conflict, and community development and comprehensive community planning. Probably the hardest working man in North America today. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them. And I promise, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Mack.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for your introduction and your participation. And I want to also thank my co-presenter and colleague, Lester Kurtz, a longtime friend. So it's just a pleasure to be with you, Les, and for us to have this conversation about two people that we have studied and worked on for quite some time. And Lester, Mike, I know you turned it over to me, but I hope this can be a conversation, between Lester and myself, and even some of the participants. Mike, if you'll manage that process and however you choose to, but I think engaging a conversation on this important subject might be the best way to really bring in the youth and others on our call. My work principally has been Martin Luther King Jr. and his logic, as I like to call it, of nonviolent social change. And as was mentioned earlier, this idea of nonviolence is is much broader and vast than meets the eye. And I think both Gandhi and King understood nonviolence in ways that we have not fully explored, particularly King, following Gandhi and learning so much from Gandhi. And I think both King and Gandhi would expect that we today would do what King did. King learned from Gandhi, and he re-articulated it and expanded the idea of nonviolence, making it practical and relevant to his time and the specific circumstances that he and his colleagues, his fellow sojourners in the struggle for civil and human rights in the mid-20th century movement of African Americans did. So I think that's a wonderful way, Les, to really begin the conversation about what nonviolence is and how King and Gandhi understood them.
Oh, thanks. It's a real honor to be here, and nice to meet all of you. I think we have like 5 or 10 minutes to tell you everything I know about Gandhi, which usually takes me about 10 years. But actually, I thought following up on what people have been saying, I thought it might be good to start with a story. You may know Gandhi he grew up in India, British India, went off to England to study the law, and when he came back, he got a job as a lawyer. And so here he's a young man, fresh back from law school. He goes to court and he stands up to speak, and he's like terrified, and he's frozen and he can't speak. And he essentially fails as a lawyer, which I think is a good lesson for all of us who are not gifted with eloquence, like people like Johnny Mack and Claiborne Carson, who just kind of stumble around when we're trying to speak. That was Gandhi, right? That was the young Gandhi. So if you don't feel eloquent, why, take heart. I wanted to share a couple of things with you, and I'll talk a little fast. But if I'm going too fast, I'm not going to show you all my slides. I'll be glad to share them with you later. But I wanted to share a couple of things with you. First of all, this photograph, which was taken at a conference we organized at the University of Texas years ago, that sort of shows you the lineage and the progression. And the way I like to think about it is we have a picture of Dr. King in his office with Gandhi on the wall, picture of Gandhi on the wall. So it goes from Gandhi to King. Then we have Arun Gandhi and Bernice King holding the picture. And then it comes out to us, right? I think if we follow the progression out, so we're now the baton has passed to us. I have like two basic things about Gandhi that I'll try to share, and then I want to, at some point in the conversation, I'd like to share with you part of a rap song, which I thought would be great for this audience. I taught a course on Gandhi years ago at the University of Texas, and I said, I'm flexible for the final paper. I'm flexible. Let me know what you want to do. And so one of the students came up to me and said, can I write a rap song? I said, well, okay, as long as it's annotated and cites most of the readings of the course. And he did it. He actually wrote this song that summarizes most of the points in the entire semester's course. So I thought I'd play a little bit of it for you later on. But let me make sort of two points I would like to have take away about Gandhi's message. The first one is that it's what Gandhi did that was really revolutionary, I think. Galtung says Gandhi is to conflict what Einstein and Newton were to physics. He gave us a whole new paradigm for thinking about conflict. And there are sort of two ideas or moral ethical teachings that run through all of the faith traditions and ethical teachings. The warrior and the pacifist. What are we to do when we face evil, injustice? The warrior says we have to stand up and fight, and the pacifist says we're not allowed to harm. And what Gandhi did was he put those two contradictory ideas together in the nonviolent activist, the satyagrahi, who stands up and fights without harming, right? And so nonviolent struggle is still seen as kind of a sacred duty, and Gandhi tried to address the dilemmas of both of these. So on September 11th in 1906, he launches his nonviolent resistance in South Africa. And the other sort of big point I wanted to make is that I see him sort of following three steps: listen, analyze, and mobilize, right? So the first thing to do is to listen. And I like Thich Nhat Hanh's idea of deep listening. What are the grievances? And not just the talking heads on television, but the people around the world. We have techniques for doing this now, a lot of sophisticated techniques that we didn't have at Gandhi's time. Surveys, focus groups, interviews, narrative analysis. We need to begin unpacking the multiple sources of information about how people are suffering around the world. And also now non-human inhabitants, the creatures that we share the world with and the world itself. So that's listening. Second step is analyzing. I find it really helpful to turn to Galtung's triangle. All of Galtung, what Galtung has done is basically bring Gandhi into the social sciences, right? And most of what Galtung brings to us, I think, is actually inspired by and guided by Gandhi. So Galtung says we have different kinds of violence: direct violence, what we usually think of as violence, war, sexual assault, physical assault, so on. But underneath the surface are structural violence and cultural violence. Structural violence is the harm that's done by the way we organize society. My idea is especially malnutrition, child malnutrition, I think is the best example. Millions and millions of children dying of malnutrition and related causes every year. Cultural violence, all the cultural themes that reinforce that. And then I added a fourth kind of violence, eco-violence, to Galtung's 1990 article, because now we see the importance of the damage that we've done to the environment. If we flip Galtung's triangle, and this is something I've actually worked on with Johnny Mack, what I like to call the nonviolence diamond. So we have direct nonviolence, which is the social movements, civil resistance, protests, non-cooperation, nonviolent intervention, boycotts, sit-ins, marches, protests. We have structural nonviolence. This is building up, and Gandhi had you sort of, you resist the existing structures, but at the same time you begin building the structures of the world that we want to have. And then cultural nonviolence, encouraging these cultural themes that promote direct and structural nonviolence. And then, of course, sustainability, deep ecology, efficient use of resources, and so on. I have more slides, but I will stop there and turn it back over to Johnny, because I think from what I've seen of things Johnny has said and written about Dr. King is that there's such a synergy there, and we can see the sort of, you know, this sort of powerful force that was unleashed by Gandhi and the Indian freedom movement that inspires Dr. King and the civil rights. If we had another hour or two, I'd show you the path as I see it from Gandhi's ashram straight to the civil rights movement and beyond. Johnny?
Lester, thanks so much. It's good to see that diamond again after so many years. But you know, Lester, making nonviolence relevant in this century, at this time, for this generation, is really, I think, part of, and perhaps principally, what the Turning Point Summit is really all about. And what you've presented is really this progression of understanding where Gandhi, as you so eloquently demonstrated, took these two ideas, these counterposing ideas of violence and pacifism, if you will, that is direct physical violence and pacifism, and he brings them together and creates, as Galtung would say, a new idea that the world had not previously understood quite the way he was able to bring them together. And again, as was noted earlier, Gandhi did this at a very young age, still in his 20s, as he begins to think this through. Along comes Martin Luther King, decades later, actually, who learns about Gandhi as African Americans are struggling for their rights, particularly civil rights. But that emerges, as you know, into human rights. Significantly, again, though, still in his very young 20s, well, perhaps in his mid-20s, King begins to grapple with the idea of how to make nonviolent social change that is durable and sustainable over time. So while these young men wrestled with issues of change, and they did it through specific, direct, as we understand it today, action techniques, they were looking beyond the moment. They were looking beyond the event itself. And it seems to me that that's the work that I saw in the slide that you presented with the triangle, that as humans evolve and move through this civilizing process, as I like to call it, as they move through, I think that's Norbert Elias, right? As they move into now, as we move into the 21st century, is there more to nonviolence that we have not yet uncovered? And I think, as we saw with King, as I've noted, who pushes the envelope in his understanding of nonviolence, and he calls for a revolution of values, for example. So King takes nonviolence. He understands that Gandhi has built his framework of nonviolence on love and soul force and satyagrahi. And King then says that there's still more. There is this idea of infusing within the social structure a framework of values, so that the structure itself, how we organize society itself, reflects this framework of values. And that then becomes our challenge today, and the work still left undone, even after Gandhi and after King and after you and me, Lester. So the challenge that we have today is to see what young women and men are going to do with this idea of nonviolence. And you teach that, don't you, Les, in some of the workshops that you're doing around the world?
Yeah, I really I like the way you put it. That in fact, you know, both Gandhi and King had this kind of multidimensional way of thinking about nonviolence, and that sometimes gets lost. I think, you know, part of what happens with, you know, the mass movements, the demonstrations in the streets, bringing down a dictator, all of that is sexy, right, and exciting, and so on. But we also see the need to do this sort of multiple work, which I think, you know, Dr. King's idea of the world house, of, you know, building the house. At the same time, we're resisting this sort of dual, I don't know how to, maybe what we're resisting and building
Yes.
at the same time, that sort of dual process, which is very complicated. And I think we see it, for example, in Egypt. They brought down the dictator, but the people who were resisting had no structure to replace the dictatorship. And so, you know, in Egypt, for example, we had you know, we had the Muslim Brotherhood and the military were the other two nationwide organized institutional structures that ended up in sequence taking over the system after nonviolent resistance brought down the dictator. So I think part of our work and the work of this next generation is figuring out how to do that simultaneous work of beginning to institutionalize the values, as you put it, at the same time that they're resisting the structures that undermine those values.
I'm just going to interrupt. Speaking of the next generation, we have a great question from Edward. Did you want to ask your question?
I didn't want to interrupt because it's so interesting listening to the conversation. But it's just I've been trying to hear and channel and think of what is the best ways of channeling some of the learnings from King and Gandhi in the unique challenges that we're facing today. So the two questions in a sense might be the same, but what would be the biggest challenge for both King and Gandhi? Were they working for nonviolence in today's world compared to the unique context that they had? And I just wanted to add a second, actually, was what would be the actions that could best channel their teachings in our day-to-day lives today?
Really good question, Edward. Lester, do you want to go first?
Well, let me just say, I mean, what you're doing here is part of what needs to be done, right? We start with the actions. I'm not sure that the situation is that different from Gandhi's and King's. I mean, basically, I think the main difference is, well, there may be a couple of differences between their times and ours. Is, first of all, power has become even more concentrated. You know, Gandhi was fighting against the British Empire, which, you know, sun never set, and King was fighting against the sort of racism of the American system, especially, although he saw a much bigger picture. And now we have a global system that's where power is increasingly concentrated. And so we have, you know, there was a recent study by some Swiss scholars who saw 737 corporations accumulate control over all 80% of the world's transnational corporations and their value. I mean, there's this incredible concentration of power taking place in the world today. So we can't just resist that, although we've also seen the incredible ability of people power to bring about major change. But we also need to begin building the networks, and what you're doing here, this is the structure that you're building, the structures here. And so that's part of why I'm so excited to meet you folks and to applaud what you're doing.
I would add, Edward, to Lester's important point that, particularly King, toward the end of his life, and remember now, King certainly understood that his life was daily in jeopardy. By the time he's in his early 30s, he recognizes that he had put his life on the line for the sake of the movement. But he understood that this resistance aspect of nonviolence, while incredibly effective, as Dr. Carson intimated in his opening comments, is not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And so this network that Lester Kurtz is speaking of is so crucial, and it's why this summit is so important. I think what Dr. King would look for today is where and how we're building that network. That is, Lester talked about people power, and people power is more than, as Lester indicated, resistance. There are other forms of nonviolent action. And in the triangle or the diamond that Lester showed in his slide, and the triangle that Johan Galtung talks about, by the way, I'll be doing a workshop, as Keshav indicated. I think it's Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Tuesday and Wednesday, I see Keshav saying yes. I'll be doing a workshop on this idea of other forms of nonviolence, and how to build this network and utilize nonviolence not only as direct action, but as cultural action and as social cultural structural action. And then in Lester's framework, he even talks about environmental nonviolence. So there's so much more to explore. So the direct answer to your question is, I believe that King would be in line with these ideas of exploring and infusing the values of nonviolence in these frameworks of direct, structural, cultural, and yes, less ecological nonviolence as well. I hope that's helpful, Edward.
What we have that Gandhi and King did not is the internet, right? And so, although it's not the same as meeting in person, we all know that. And I wish we could all come together for a month and do this sort of intense community building. But there's some real possibilities, I think, now of using the internet, because we can all come together. I like to say I found during the pandemic, we've solved the problem of space, but not of time. So there's still a time problem sometimes getting everybody globally together at the same time. But we do have these options of meeting one another this way and building that network, which in fact is precisely what the corporations and governments are doing, right? And militaries, they have the resources, the financial resources. We have the people resources, right? Because there are just a few thousand of them, and there are billions of us.
That's right, Les. In fact, I like to say, particularly in my workshops, that while the state may have the monopoly on violence, the people have the monopoly on nonviolence. And if Ackerman and Duvall are correct, and I think they are, nonviolence is a force more powerful than violence. And it's precisely because, as you indicate, Les, where there may be tens, hundred thousands of corporations, there are billions of people. And so the power really does reside in the people. What the people lack, arguably, is the infrastructure, the organized, and someone else put in the chat, I didn't see exactly who, that the social fabric itself has been frayed. That is, the people have not organized and established a fabric that is comprehensive in putting in the infrastructures necessary to address the four arenas, if I can call them that now, the four segments, if I can call it that, of nonviolence. And if we focus solely on one element and miss the others, then we can't tap into the true power that the people have. Once again, why this summit is so important.
Yeah. So, Johnny, can I play a little bit of that rap song?
Oh, by all means.
I won't play the whole thing, but I think people might enjoy it.
As long as you promise not to rap along with it.
Oh, okay. I'll work on that. I'll work on that.
This is Lumen,
Oh, sorry.
the first
sorry.
device for hacking your
I
metabolism.
had it set up
With
before
just one
without
breath,
the ad.
Lumen's
Okay, there we go.
Dedicated to all spiritual activists, truth seekers, and peaceful warriors worldwide. I regard myself as a soldier who is a soldier of peace. Once upon a time, not long ago, there was a boy who would grow and become a brave soul. He lived in India, and his name was Gandhi. He believed in human rights, and he fought for equality. He felt so strongly that he trained himself, cause he realized first he'd have to change himself. He changed his clothes and decided to walk. Some days he practiced silence and refused to talk. When he was young, he studied to be a lawyer. Then he became a great spiritual warrior. He read from the scriptures of every religion and came to the realization that we're all God's children. Because he understood that we're all equal, he became a spokesman for the people. A karma yogi devoted to service, to spread truth and peace was his purpose. You gotta be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Just like Gandhi. Gandhi dedicated his life to the cause, even when it meant breaking unjust laws. He often faced prison and incarceration, but that only strengthened his determination. He said he would make every sacrifice, but that he would never kill or take a life. He used his heart instead of his fist, and he taught non-violence as the way to resist. A peaceful soldier who used his mind to fight for the rights of humankind, but not just people, animals too. And his basic teaching, God is truth. He joined Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Jains, and Jews. All the many paths that lead into the light that shines bright inside of me and you. You gotta be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Time for an eye makes the whole world blind, and it takes more strength and faith to be kind. With that in mind, Gandhi took a stand.
We are out of time, Dr. Kurtz. We have to
Stop violence, guns with fast, not even for days until the right.
stop you.
Yeah,
Could you put that link in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put that link there. Yeah.
Please do. Fantastic. Les, I'm surprised I've not seen that before. You didn't share it with me. You've been hiding it from me. That's very nice. Really
Thank you.
like
That
it.
was very awesome. We are out of time, sadly. That goes by very quick. We'll have to move. huge thanks to Dr. Lester Kurtz, Dr. Johnny Mack, and thank you for everyone for your involvement in here. To paraphrase Dr. King, we ignore Gandhi at our peril. And I will turn it back over to Keshav.
Thank you so much once again to all our speakers so far, and Mike for this amazing moderation of the session. And again, like all our participants who've been making some fantastic contributions on the chat, and your questions are indeed very, very welcome. So thank you. Now we have and again, I've been hearing Dr. Kurtz, and he's been talking about how we need more time. So I think this is a key takeaway and an action step that I'm already noting with the youth working group. That we need to put together more of these meetings and these discussions together, and have, so that we have more space, more time to discuss all of that. So Dr. Kurtz, I will hold you up on what you've just mentioned during the panel. So thank you once again. We'll be now inviting Dr. Carson to talk to us about Gandhiji, about Dr. King. He is an inspiring speaker. I mean, I can go on a lot. I can go on about his achievements, but like I'd love to invite him and give him the floor rather than just talking about how great he is, because that I can do for a very long time. So, Dr. Carson, could I please invite you to share your thoughts and interact with all of us, please?
I just changed my background to indicate that I was once young too. So, and I think that's a good way of starting, that this is a long struggle, and I think one of the most unfortunate things about Dr. King is that he didn't have the chance to live as long as Gandhi did and allow his ideas to develop even further. But I think that one thing I'd like to do, I don't know if the moderator can handle this, but I feel a little bit uncomfortable about the kind of one direction in which the conversation is going. And I don't know whether it's possible to kind of moderate some specific questions that people might have, and that I could focus more on those.
Absolutely, Dr. Carson. We can certainly do that, and I think our participants can also. You have this wonderful opportunity, all of you, to ask direct questions to Dr. Carson. So you can actually raise your hand, and or alternatively, you can mention your questions on the chat box. If I can actually take the privilege, sir, to ask you one leading question to begin with, I think, and then so that's the privilege I can take to ask you, and then everyone's questions will keep coming along. So I would really like to ask you about your first interactions with nonviolence, and how you actually got into this domain of nonviolence and nonviolent action, and how that journey sort of led you to Dr. King. I think that's a supremely important question, because we all as young people know about Dr. King, Gandhiji, but somewhere to start connecting with them and to deep dive into the journey itself, we all need that turning point, I think, in our life. So hearing your experience can possibly inspire us and show us some way. So thank you.
Well, it's a long story that I've actually put in a memoir. If you want to look at, I call it Martin's Dream, and but that's the long story. The shorter aspect of it is that I grew up in a town where I didn't know very many Black people personally, because it was in New Mexico. There weren't very many Black people there at that time, and in the town, the only exposure I had was seeing in the newspapers that people my age were Black and they were doing important things. These were the students in the sit-ins, the freedom rides. I was inspired by them. I was able to meet a few of them through student conferences. One of the first of these people I met was Stokely Carmichael, who was at that time a student at Howard University. And I met him just a few days before the March on Washington. And I remember he advised me, I wanted to go to the March on Washington. And he said, well, why do you want to go to that picnic when you can go and join us? And at that point, I would have had to leave school and give up, my hope of becoming a college graduate, the first one in my family. And so I chose to go to the march instead. And so I happened to be there with 200,000 other people. And I knew really from that moment that I wanted to be part of that this was something really exciting in my life. A few months after that, I went to another conference. They were organizing for a Mississippi Summer Project to bring students to Mississippi to directly confront the Jim Crow system. And the leader of that meeting was Bob Moses, a name that I think some of you have heard, but he's an extremely important person in the movement. For me, he was even more central. I never met and talked with Martin Luther King in general, but in person, but I did meet people like Bob Moses, and then later on, so many others that I could name, who were actually doing the work. And I guess that brings back that idea that I have of, that it's one thing to change yourself, but to bring that change to the world is a much more difficult and sometimes dangerous process. And I saw people taking on that danger. And I think one of the themes that I also put into my later career as a scholar is the notion that change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. That real change has to come from the bottom up. That if it's imposed from the top, it's always going to be a fragile reality, because ultimately people have the freedom to challenge it. And so I saw through that experience of people my own age challenging the system that exists and eventually surmounting, or I guess the best thing I can say is that they replaced these systems of injustice that existed in the South. And, so that gave my life meaning. It gave my scholarship meaning. It meant that rather than simply becoming a college graduate, I wanted to be a college graduate to do something with that, to make a change in the world. And so I think that was the transformative experience that I assume that many of the young people are going through themselves, of what is your purpose in the world? What would you like to see accomplished during the course of your life? And sometimes those dreams become very radical, a lot of change I'd like to see in the world. And I think one thing that's similar with Gandhi and King is that many of their dreams were not realized. And Martin Luther King talked about that toward the end of his life. I may not be there to see it, but that's okay, because I know that I've set the world in a different direction, and that there are other people willing to take up that struggle and complete it. And I think that's the nature of what I see all of you trying to do, is trying to say, what is my purpose in the world? I actually believe that one of the reasons why I was drawn to the movement is that it was just much more exciting than ordinary life. And I didn't want to just have a career. I wanted to have a life. And there's a difference. And so I think that those are the choices that are in front of everyone I see on the screen. Even those of us who are older, we're still trying to do it. We're still trying to build that life that we can, and that Gandhian phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. That made a lot of sense to me. So I think that's a voyage. One of the themes that I learned from Ella Baker, another great person in the movement, is the notion of the long distance runner. That many of us think that the struggle is kind of a sprint. And so I hear these phrases like, yeah, I used to be in the movement, but I kind of burned out. And I've never quite understood why that should burn you out. I mean, because if you're doing something that inspires you, it can't burn you out. It can realize your potential. It can open up. You might get tired at certain points in your life, but that's quite a different experience of saying, well, I used to be an activist when I was younger, but now I kind of focus on my own career. Well, why can't you make your career your activism, or activism your career? All of these choices, I think, are open to everyone. And, part of the reason why people are drawn to movements is that they're exciting. They fulfill something in your life that is missing before. So I think that that's the choices that, well, first of all, I'd like to hear from people about the choices that you are going through, and maybe I can help in terms of guiding just from my experience. But I think all of you recognize that all of us have different experiences, and we're going to have different stages of our lives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson, for that very insightful and actually very encouraging response. We have a question from Simon, who is one of our participants and actually youth speakers. So Simon, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to read it out? I think it'll be nice if you ask it yourself with Dr. Carson.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Carson, and thank you for such an inspiration. You are an inspiration to most of us young people. And also when you speak about how movements are exciting, they're inspirational, I kind of look back and then see myself in that boat, because I love it. I love doing this work, and it inspires me each and every day. So I have read quite a number of content on civil resistance, on the civil rights movement that I know that you are really part of. I really want to learn from you about some of the key challenges that you faced as a movement, and how did you overcome them? Because I know some of these challenges are similar, and we grapple a lot in our daily lives here and there to find practical solutions that can help us. And I'm thinking that some of your submissions on these solutions may be of help to us. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that question. But by the way, where are you?
Oh, I'm based in Uganda, in East Africa. Yeah.
Yes, thanks for letting me know that. I think it's, to me, the best lesson that I can convey is just that persistence. That the people I know who, are what I would call ex-activists, and I think have just not expanded their imagination to the forms that activism can take. And that building a career as someone bringing change to the world, you also, I think one of the lessons is be grateful for the small victories that you do experience. that when you look back, getting a Voting Rights Act passed was an important thing to happen. It was worth giving your life just for that. But to see other kinds of changes occurring because you stuck with it, I think are also important. So just be grateful for the small victories, but also be willing to accept the disappointments, that the victories that you did not have, or the setbacks. For someone like myself who sees that the Voting Rights Act that I struggled so hard to achieve is being decimated by people in this country, or when you struggle, like for South Africa, to bring democracy, and you see a nation run by people who are in it for themselves through greed and other things that enter into the picture. You see disappointment, and you understand that Gandhi never saw the goal that he was struggling for the most, and that is, the independence. That it's King, I think, if he had lived, he would have also had a great deal of disappointments. And during his lifetime, he talked about that, about those disappointments. But you also appreciate the other side. You appreciate the fact that some change that you dreamed about, you actually were able to witness. And I think that balance of disappointment, joy in the small victories, that's what makes a long distance runner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson and Simon, again for your question. I think it's a question we can all relate to in our respective journeys. So I will.
Keshav, one thing I wanted to kind of point out, I had that banner about the anti-war movement. I remember my first organizing effort to try to build that on the UCLA campus. And after weeks of organizing, trying to get people to come, I came to the meeting, there were 6 people there. And I was profoundly disappointed. But yet later on, 2 or 3 years later, I saw thousands of people. So that meeting with 6 people was worth doing, even though I was devastated, that, all of this, and are we going to change the world, all 6 of us? Are we going to end the war, all 6 of us? And so that's going to the meeting with where you're disappointed, or when you feel like the meeting didn't result in anything good. Quite frankly, I think that led me to think that maybe meetings were not always the best way of building movements.
Certainly, Dr. Carson, and it's something that I think many of us who are working in mobilizing young people towards this effort, we face this challenge. I think this was such a gem of an anecdote that you've shared towards the end. I know Dr. Mack was raising his hand, so Dr. Mack followed by Devesh. We have a couple of questions, and then Edward has a fantastic question. So these are the 3 that we're taking in this order. So Dr. Mack, over to you.
Actually, thank you, Keshav. I'll yield to the younger persons who have questions and comments. I think Devesh would be next.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Keshav. Dr. Carson, I've heard a lot about you and from you over the last 2 years at different events which the Dias has hosted. My question is that you spoke about change which comes from bottom to the top. And at the same time, I've heard many of the people associated with the World House Project to be talking about the ideology or idea of nonviolence. Sir, over years, I've seen how idea usually divides people and idea creates identity and eventually people divide. So, how do we reconcile an ideology with change which comes from bottom to up and not up from top to down? Because top to down is that idea sometimes gets forced. So, that's my question, sir.
Well, that's a very profound question. Yeah, I think it gets to the heart of perhaps one problem I have with someone who many people do believe that leadership comes from the top down, not from the bottom up. But I don't think movements. I think we can be inspired by leaders. But I quite frankly think that the notion of the charismatic leader is a very dangerous notion, because we become dependent on that kind of a leader. And when we're deprived of that leader, as we were with Dr. King, things fall apart. And I think often it puts enormous pressures on that leader that one person should not have to bear. And I can see that now that I can see from studying King all these years, how much that pressure must have cost him. You know, there's a psychiatrist who's been working on Dr. King, and you know, I don't believe in all these psychological analyses of people that you've never really had in therapy, but I think it's very clear that there were just physical results of all the pressures on him, that he was hospitalized because of all the pressures, and that was because we have this notion that there are these charismatic people that we need to carry out movements. But I think that we can have different models of leadership. The servant leader idea, that the leader is the servant of the people, and that's the way we should think about it. And one of the goals of leadership is to delegate, so that you bring more people into that circle. And I think that's something that Dr. King did quite well, and that Gandhi did quite well, of bringing other people into his circle so that they would learn the lessons. And when you are taken away from the movement, or there's other people who are able to carry on. So any kind of movement that kind of leads to that dependence on a single person is I think weakened by that dependence. And in saying that, though, you know, obviously there are people who are better speakers. I was enthralled by Dr. King's oratory, but I was also inspired by John Lewis's speech at the march. He wasn't quite at the level of Dr. King, and his oration, I could probably repeat it from memory today if somebody could be that articulate. That's a special skill. But I don't think, and for, you know, I mentioned Bob Moses would be you know, at the other end. You know, he wasn't a public speaker, but I think he had an enormous impact on the movement and on me.
Thank you,
Just
Dr.
one thing I'm saying, Keshav, is that you don't have to be the great orator
Yes, yes.
I think you are supremely articulate but there's only one Dr. King per generation.
For sure. Actually, uh, I myself was a very, very scared teenager when I heard the phrase "I have a dream," and I think when Dr. King is concluding that speech, it almost sounds like a crescendo is reached in a rock song when he goes towards the end. So it was actually one of the most empowering moments for me as a teenager to get over my fears and start believing that I can also have a dream. So this is one reason that being at the World House Project and being here doing this is means so much more to me than anything. So Dr. Carson, thank you for that, and I completely agree. We have a couple of so Dr. Mac, thank you for giving for letting our younger participants ask the questions. So continuing with the questions, we have Edward, and then we will have Ganga, who has questions. Ed, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I think I also saw Nikhil had his hand up, and I've asked the question already, so I wanted to defer first. But otherwise, happy to ask.
Okay, so let me get to Ganga and then to Nikhil, and then we can come back to you. And also, just before we do that, I want to tell everyone that every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, the World House Project, which is organizing this entire Turning Point Summit, we have our weekly meetings where several of these themes are discussed. So, for all of you who are not the members of the World House Project as of now, I will highly, highly encourage you to join in, and so we can continue on these discussions even in our weekly meetings. And I think
I've also opened up a Monday, I guess I call it the office hour. Mondays at 3:30 Pacific time for those people, and it goes on till 5. But after 4 o'clock, everyone who's not a teenager has to shut up. But so I've set aside a half an hour before the young people come into the room, and after that, you're forbidden to say a word, because I don't want the conversation with the young people to be interrupted.
So we will email you all the details about the office hour and the World House Project calls as well, and we hope that you do join us. Ganga, would you like to ask your question? I think it's a very critical question, and then Nikhil. So thanks, Ed, for being so nice.
Yeah, thank you. And as you said, sir, I think we do need more young voices in this platform, because I'm in the UK right now and I don't see many young people. It's like there's a trend of young people not having the hope or like the motivation to move forward this movement that we have here. And I don't see young people voices at the top. I don't see voice of women, voice of people of color at the top. So I would like to ask this: how can we encourage more young people, more people who don't have the privilege of thinking about this, who have their own crisis going on? If you look at Ukraine, young people don't have, they're fighting for their lives, so they don't have the privilege to actually think about fighting for others, fighting for a global movement as such. So how can we make young people, how can we promote this, how can we have more hope for them and for others as well? But as this meeting is going on, I think we would need more young people to engage in this than I myself would have the courage to speak more openly. So yeah, so how can we just promote this to people of my age and my gender? Thank you.
Thanks for that suggestion. I think the main way I would look at that is from my experience, the most meaningful interactions were with people my own age. And I think that you have to do that. I mean, when the idea of the working group is that anyone can form it. I mean, Keshav has taken the lead in terms of doing this, and I admire the work that it has taken to bring all of you together. But there's nothing that stops any of you from forming your own working group, starting with the people around you. I look upon the World House project as a facilitator. Any of you could join us tomorrow and come in and say, look, I want to form a working group of women who are interested in changing the world, and do it. And start with the people that you know. And because of the miracle of digital communication, it can grow from there. I think that when I think back at how quickly the civil rights struggle grew, just through very primitive communications, telephones and things like that, relying on mass media like newspapers, despite those limitations, when I think of what we could have done in terms of bringing attention to what was going on in the South, if we had had access to Zoom, if we had had access to modern cell phones. In fact, just to take that example, when the 3 civil rights workers were killed during the Mississippi summer, if they had had cell phones, they would still be alive today. They would have been able to call from their jail cell and say, this is what is happening to me. And just think of how that has changed, how that one young woman who had a cell phone when George Floyd was being murdered changed history. So that's the possibility. And so I encourage you, don't listen. When I was a certain age, I didn't trust anyone over 30. I might have listened to them, but I wanted to form a movement of people my age. And so I could be inspired by Martin Luther King, but I wanted to work with Bob Moses and Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis. I mean, they were my age. So please do it. And again, we will help you facilitate that.
Thank you. I think that, the things you said, it actually motivates me, to actually form a group myself. So yeah, thank you for the encouragement. It's really required.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. And Ganga will also be actually presenting. She has authored a brilliant piece on from the Youth Declaration with Nikhil, who will be our next person asking the question. They are actually presenting tomorrow, and for the Youth Co-Creation Strategy. So Ganga, thank you for your continued efforts and leadership to develop those outcomes also. So thank you. Nikhil, over to you, please.
I would like to thank every single one of the speakers here to essentially, guide us, the youth, in order to, just overall make us understand what non-violence is. I do understand that all of you have really busy schedules. Second off, thank you, Ed, for please giving me the chance to speak. Now, sir, I have a question which is kind of conflicting. I hope that I'll be able to find the answer. Sir, what I see has been happening in all the definitions given of
Keshav and Nikhil, I'm sorry to interrupt. Nika, we're having a difficult time hearing you. I don't know if
Oh,
you can make an
yeah,
adjustment with your headphone.
yeah. I'll just please give me a second. Am I audible right now? I mean,
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So first off, I wanted to thank every single one of the speakers for being here and essentially guiding the youth. Second, Ed, for giving me the chance to ask the question. Sir, I have a question which might be a tad conflicting. As what I see is in all the documents mentioned, it's like non-violence essentially stems up to think about violence at all. But I do believe something, and it is, it's something which conflicts my mind, is that sometimes violence is necessary in order to promote non-violence, especially for the greater good. For example, I just think about some instances where if we as people, as we have discussed in our conversations, it is essentially that the power lies with the people. And if in certain circumstances, we as people had banded together and actually used violence, maybe we could have prevented some instances of the exploitation done to us. For example, in the Indians, when the Britishers were conquering, essentially first war was with one of the rulers of Bengal. And I think if we had won that, maybe the Britishers could not have captured India and made us suffer for overall 160 to 200 years. So, what my question essentially to you is, do you feel that sometimes violence can be something which is important in order to promote non-violence for the greater good or for the greater purpose? Yeah, that's essentially it, sir. Thank you.
Well, I suspect that there'll be a number of people who might disagree with my answer, but I would say yes. I think that, to me, the argument for nonviolence is not that violence doesn't ever work. I mean, I think that the spread of Nazi Germany would be an example of eventually some violence had to be used to win that war and to get rid of that evil, and to save a lot of other lives. I don't, Gandhi was not naive about war. He had participated in war, not as a soldier, but early in his life, he saw war firsthand. And so I think he understood that was something he was trying to build an alternative to that, and saying, over the long haul, you might use nonviolence to stop someone from murdering somebody, but in the long run, nonviolence is more effective and brings about a peace at the end. At the end of World War II, we didn't have a peace, we had a Cold War that went on and killed tens of millions of other people. So it didn't solve the problem of war, but it just got rid of one of the main perpetrators of violence. So I think that my own view as a historian, I think it's naive to believe that nonviolence can conquer everything. Maybe over the long haul, it's the best way of getting to a better world. Anything that is achieved through violence can be overturned by violence. So I think that it's that longer term aspect of it that makes sense to me. Also, what I said at the very beginning is that nonviolence is necessary but not sufficient. Nonviolence has to be mobilized, it has to be organized, it has to be it has to be strategic. And I think that's what Johnny Mack is already pointed out. It has to understand that some evil is not simply some person doing an evil thing. It's systemic, and that you have to build a new system. You have to build a new way of organizing society in order to get rid of that systemic violence. But, you know, to me, poverty is systemic violence. You have to build a society in which people don't have to steal in order to survive. And so I think that's part of thinking through, and maybe I'm sure in your discussions, as you get deeper into the study of nonviolence, you'll understand that it's not naive. It's something that can be thought through and can be tested by history itself. And we should not ever overstate it, because that leads to disappointment. You know, and I think that's part of what happened in the movements that I mentioned beginning in terms of the civil rights movement. There was an expectation that these victories would bring about better lives for everybody. And when they didn't, there was that anger and disappointment that did lead to violence. So I think these are the kinds of things that need to, I think you've raised a very important question, in other words, that I think you should continue to press, because it should not be ignored. It should not be, you know, sometimes when I've been to nonviolence workshops, I feel like I'm the skeptic who's going to ruin it all because I'm going to raise questions. And I think that it's good to raise those questions. It's naive not to.
Yeah. You know, Clay, one way, if I may, Keshav, this is such an important question that Nikhil has asked, and it often makes would-be nonviolentists uncomfortable to even try to answer. But, you know, when you think about it, there's the idea of the violence of nonviolence and the nonviolence of violence, you know, and this is rooted in, we mentioned earlier, the issue of the greater good, you know, what is the greater good? But there's also the issue of the greater harm. And I think that's what Dr. Carson is speaking to. You know, when you think about the example he used of, you know, during the Nazi regime and the Second World War, these are very difficult questions, and the nuances are difficult as well. But we must grapple with them. And nonviolence is not only action, but it's aspiration. It's something we work towards, we look towards, we aspire to. So I hope that's helpful as a way of framing your important question.
Okay, so thank you everyone, Nikhil, for your question. It's a question we hope, and I've learned this from Dr. Max sometimes, that you need to address to us the answer to it in the coming days, how you think this reconciliation happens. But due to paucity of time for this session is concluding, and we will be again. Let me just express my deepest gratitude to Dr. Carson for creating this interaction itself rather than a one way discussion. And again, I would encourage all of you to join the World House Project, to form your working groups within the World House Project. And this summit, for instance, is a result of the youth working group, which again, like, I think it also speaks to the idea of delegation that Dr. Carson talked about, to expanding the movement. So Ganga, I will be very happy if you take over my coordinator's position at this youth working group. I will be very happy personally also. So thank you once again. Now we are moving to a fascinating panel discussion with all our young leaders. The panel will be moderated by Devesh Gupta, who is also the coordinator of the Youth Assembly. We were supposed to have Neda Jamal as the co-moderator, but as we all know, technology defeats us at the worst of moments by the virtue of it being technology. So she is not joining us for this panel, but we have Devesh, and Devesh will be introducing to us all our inspiring panelists, and looking forward to that discussion. And my apologies to all the questions which have not been taken up so far. So I will make sure that this chat gets to Dr. Carson, and in the coming days we find answers to everyone's questions as much as possible. Devesh, over to you.
Thank you, Keshav. Good evening to everyone from India. Today, on the 2nd of October, on the occasion of International Day of Non-Violence, I would like to welcome you all to the panel discussion with young participants engaged in non-violent actions on application of non-violence in 2022 from a young person's perspective. From this panel discussion, we aim to explore and learn from the young people about their experiences and learnings from their own actions, lives, and journey of peace and non-violence. I am Devesh Gupta, coordinator for the Youth Assembly, and I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion. Quick introduction to myself. I work with human beings of all ages by working on transformation of the psyche of the human being, where we focus on individual action, love, and consciousness change on the inside and outside to bring a change in the society. I worked with the Dais for 5 years, and as a youth got an opportunity and the Dais literally to learn and share my learnings by being at Kabul, witnessing conflict, to seeing climate change at Fiji, and learning about myself and the world by living with and mentoring students all across the globe. 2 years ago, I started my own organization called Emerge, where we focus on individual change through right action and education. Moving ahead, this panel discussion is scheduled for 60 minutes, and we have 4 speakers from around the world spearheading and creating impact in their respective spaces. Some basic housekeeping essentials for everyone. Please keep your microphones at mute during all points unless recognized by the moderator to speak. If there is any question you have for the speaker, please send the question in writing on the chat and we can take it up. And please be respectful to each other and sensitive to everyone's opinion and experiences. Now, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity to invite Miss Andrea Robles to introduce herself to everyone here. Miss Andrea.
Hello, everyone. I would like to see how you're doing. So maybe if you want to make a reaction on the screen or send us a message, because we also want to hear all of you. So I'm Andrea Palomo Robles. I am from Mexico. I'm a specialist in positive peace, and I have more than 10 years of experience in working with the social sector. And I'm 20 years old, so I started when I was very, very young. 28 years old, sorry. I have collaborated nationally and internationally with various peace, leadership, and human rights organizations. And I am the executive director of Satyagraha Institute. I will tell you more about this in a moment, where we train leaders in the traditions of nonviolence. I'm a political scientist, and I studied nonviolence at the Gujarat Vidyapith University, a university founded by Gandhi in India. I am a speaker and workshop facilitator on issues of conflict, nonviolence, and peace in the Americas and in Europe. I am a member of organizations that support youth development worldwide. And I am, of course, a member of the World House Global Network. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. I would now like to request Mr. Nicholas Thompson to introduce himself to everyone. Nicholas, I think you're on mute.
Oops, sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Marcus Thompson, and I am a social justice advocate based in Toronto. I'm also a union leader and motivational speaker, and My journey is really towards the elimination of systemic discrimination and racism in Canada. And I founded an organization called the Black Class Action Secretariat, which works to actively eliminate those barriers that the Black people face throughout Canadian society. And already I've seen how this work has impacted legislation, how it's impacted policy, and not only removing barriers for Black people, but also all underrepresented groups. I'm also, as I mentioned, a trade unionist, where I'm the president of a union that represents federal employees in the government of Canada. I have also held many different positions within the labor movement, advocating for a better community and a better country. So thank you for the opportunity to speak here before you, and I look forward to engaging with all of you.
Thank you, Nicholas, for being here with us. Now I would like to invite Mr. Jin Tanaka to introduce himself.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for giving the opportunity to introduce. Hello, this is Jin Tanaka. I'm from Japan. As a 21 years old, I'm the branch manager of the UNESCO International, providing the human rights support in the Asia Pacific countries with collaborating with the UNHCR. And I'm so glad to be here to talking about any of the topics or the protections and or some violence and any of the types of the systems. So thanks so much. I'm so please best regards.
Thank you, Jin. Jin had been suffering from COVID, and even then he especially found time to join us. So I would really like to thank Jin for being here with us. Next, we have Mr. Simon Bayangana with us, and who would be introducing himself to everyone.
Thank you very much, Desh. My name is Simon Peter Bayangana. I come from Uganda, East Africa. I work with Solidarity Uganda, a social movement that trains corporations, grassroots organizations, unions in civil resistance, nonviolent action, and also movement building. I am also an alumni of the RISE Global Coaching Network of Fellowship Network. I was a coach and a mentor, basically doing work around movement building and also the movement mapping tool that we use to support the grassroots movements we are from. I'm also a member of Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, a global network of activists that is supported by Nonviolence International. And also I was part of a webinar that was organized by Nonviolence International to launch the book of the late Dr. Peter Ackman, The Checklist to End Tyranny. I am part of the World House Network, and I am also an organizing fellow with the Horizons project that is trying to find an intersection between civil resistance and peace building work. Thank you, and happy to be part of this call and network.
Thank you, Simon, so much for being here with us. Now, moving on from here, first, I would like to open the floor for the panel discussion with a common leading question. And we would like to first invite Mr. Jin Tanaka for the same. Jin, could you elaborate on your personal journey towards nonviolence? And could you tell us about the turning point in your life, which has put you on the path of peace and harmony?
Okay, thanks so much. Based on my experience in my journeys, I traveled to the many countries and many joined to the supporting the many opportunities and events for in the Asia Pacific countries for the improvement of the human rights. And that time, I think we need to get some more inclusive. Likewise, the most of the youth are facing in danger for taking the education opportunities, and some of the workers are facing some of the dangers or some of the working violence. And also the now recently, the government deciding to the shifting to the more development or high class management and support and levels. But but most of the Asian countries and Asia Pacific countries, it did not strongly focus on about the protection of the rights of the laborers and working rights and so on. So that's why for the based on the youth activities, meaning to deliver to the voice of the youth for the considerations about the future engagement, future career plans for their future working place, and also the focus on into the work-life balance as well. So that's the brief point of based on my experience.
Thank you, Jin. Now, next, we have the same question, and we would now like to invite Mr. Simon Bayangana for the same.
Thank you very much. I think my leadership or my journey in civil resistance roots back from when I was a kid. Recently, I've been attending a course on public narrative by Marshall Gans, and I was trying to realize where my call comes from. Why do I care? Why do I do what I'm doing for the community? Why am I an activist? But I realized that it all roots from the time as in college, when I was a student and as a student leader, trying to run campaigns that organizing around university, campaigns that would really help us to have a student-led kind of group that was advocating for their rights. After all, I joined Solidarity Uganda as a central coordinator. At the time I joined, they had organized a land rights campaign that had brought grassroots networks together that were struggling with their land to do an occupation, which was like a very kind of powerful method of non-violence. And when people occupied the UN premises for 37 days, they were able to reclaim their land back because of the amount of pressure they kind of put on government. This gave me, like, this was a turning point for me because I saw it powerful. I saw the state trembling to see that people can achieve what they want. I saw it in a way that it was organized, that people were able to actually come together and work together in order to achieve a common kind of purpose and good. So in a sense, this was like a very big turning point in my life. And up to now, I feel like this is my passion, this is my call to action, and this is where I am meant to be because it inspires me each and every day. That's why all efforts that lead to change, that lead to social change, that advocates for non-violence, I always take them with first priority because of the passion that I share with them. Yeah, so that's my journey, and that's my turning point. A lot has happened. I can't say all here, but for me, seeing people rise up, grassroots movements rise up and making it happen so that their demand is fulfilled was a turning point in my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for sharing and for inspiring us. We'd now like to invite Miss Andrea Robles to answer the same question.
Thank you. I struggled to find only one turning point because I think I have had several ones that took me to different things. So I will tell the story. I want to start when I was 16 years old. I'm a scout, like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. And I was taking part in local initiatives for youth involvement. And by doing this, I learned that I wanted to do something for my community. So this is the first, I think, turning point. I hear some background noise. Sorry. Then I, this continued, and I took part then in a model of the United Nations in my city. And this was very inspiring and very powerful for me. Here I met an international organization working for human rights, and I loved their work, which inspired me to do more for the world. So this is the second part, not only for my community, but now I wanted to do more for the world. And as a 17 years old, I founded the activist group of this organization in my state, which brought many more opportunities with the help of social media. And I took part in groups and projects that were supporting my community development and leadership. And then through the network that I was building with this work, I received an invitation to join a program called Messengers of Peace. It's also a Scout program, which meant I would support young leaders in my community and nationally to create community-based projects combining their passions and their talents with their drive to make a change and then meet the needs of their community. So here is where I learned that I wanted to work for peace. When I heard Messengers of Peace, I thought, yes, I'm working for human rights, but peace was making much more sense for me. So this is where I started. And working with young people was very, very inspiring and very powerful. So I just wanted to continue doing this and supporting the leadership of young people. And then as a 19-year-old, I was invited to attend a youth forum in the United Nations. So now it was for real. It was not just playing the United Nations in a school. And when I got into the General Assembly room, I had to take a moment to take a breath, because I realized that being in a position of influence, we can say, and fulfilling my dreams carried a great responsibility. So this was another turning point. And then I met the Satyagraha Institute, which is where I am the director now. And I was invited to apply to this international course in the Gujarat Vidyapith University. And this is where I learned about Gandhi and most importantly about his contributions to world peace. And I found here a great space to put together nonviolence and leadership as a way to build peace. So this is where everything clicked together for me. And now what I hope for the future is to have many more opportunities to work together with leaders around the world and have many more turning points to inspire my work for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. In my own life, I've done Model UN for 10 years, and I think that once you have a turning point, then other points are more like stepping stones. It's on the same path, actually. Thank you. Now we will like to invite Mr. Nicholas Thompson to answer the same question.
Thank you very much, Devish. I grew up, I've heard the turning points for a lot of you, and one of them that really resonated for me was Simon's, and just that early childhood experience really shaped, I suppose, the rest of your life. I grew up in a very rural community in Trinidad and Tobago, experiencing a lot of racism as a child of mixed race, and those years really, when I look back at it now, represented a defining moment in my journey, and which really ignited a spirit to fight injustice and inequity. And I don't think that there was, one turning point in my journey toward nonviolence. There were probably many, but my journey began at a very young age. And I remember one day my mother, she was checking my school bag. I was probably about 6 years old. She was checking my school bag to ensure that it didn't have anything inappropriate in it. And I took a stand telling her that children have rights. Well, let's just say that didn't end very well for me, but you get the gist. The spirit was there, but probably misguided. But but seriously, at a young age, I recognized that there's a strong, pursuit in me to fight for these for injustices, and that needed a lot of guidance. I recall in high school, I led a peaceful protest when I saw teachers abusing the school feeding program, which essentially left students without food that the government was providing. They called in my mother and they said, well, it's not that Nicholas is he did anything wrong, but he's making the teachers anxious with all these protests and whatnot, right? Later on in my life, I challenged the government of Trinidad, calling for the resignation of a government minister who misappropriated hundreds of millions of dollars. That effort went viral, leading to others to call for the minister's resignation. And just about 7 days later, the minister resigned. And what this really taught me was that it only takes one actor to start a movement. It only takes one match to light a fire. And that represented one of the really defining moments in my journey towards nonviolence. And as I sat and I reflected on that journey, it really empowered me, because I'm like, when I first heard about what was happening with the misappropriation of funds, I'm like, well, how come nobody is standing up? How come nobody's saying anything? And I suppose sometimes we're always looking for someone else to act before we do. And oftentimes that allows, injustices to continue, because everyone is waiting for somebody else to act. And that really led me to the next, as Devesh put it, stepping stone, right? So you see, one door is, one turning point is leading to another, to another, to another. And that really gave me the courage and confidence to know that I'm only one person, but I can make a difference. And next, I led thousands of workers in Canada to file the landmark Black Class Action lawsuit against the government of Canada for systemic discrimination of tens of thousands of workers. Again, highlighting that it just takes one person, and that person is you, and wherever you are joining us from today. So don't look to anyone else. You have that within you already. And as Dr. Mack said earlier, the power of nonviolence has more power than, or more force than the power of violence. And the power resides with the people. So those are just some of the turning points that were instrumental in my life, advocating for the elimination of racism and discrimination in society.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for the insight into your own life and your own journey. Now we will be moving ahead and we'll be asking one follow-up question to all the participants on the insights which they have given from their own journeys. If anyone has a question from our speakers, then please write the question for the speaker who is speaking then on the chat box. First of all, our first question is for Miss Andrea. And the question is, Andrea, if you could talk about the challenges which you have faced when mobilizing people, both young and old generation, on the path of peace and nonviolence, and how do you respond to those challenges?
Okay, I have 4. I will say the 4 and then I will explain. Professionalization, strategy, intergenerational dialogue, and opportunities to take the lead. And I will elaborate. When I talk about professionalization as a challenge when mobilizing people, and I was thinking more young people because this is what the forum is focusing a bit more on. I see that professionalization is a challenge not only for young people, but in general in civil society, in the sense that the impact is often limited by the lack of tools in the sector or with the people in the sector. And we need spaces like this one to equip ourselves for the struggles ahead. But there are many more examples of what we can do to help make our work more serious and more solid. Secondly, I want to talk about strategy, and this was mentioned before, how important strategy is in nonviolence. And I think that it's something that we often miss because we wish to get speedy results. So we so much need leaders who are willing to plan for the long term and commit to the means while walking the path towards the ends. This doesn't happen always. So we do need the people who are persistent and who have a plan for the long term and how we want to achieve our goals. The next one is intergenerational dialogue. And I believe it's the only way to move forward as a society. Young people should not act as an isolated group. Of course, sometimes we can, if it makes sense. But we are not in a world of different boxes that are as isolated. Let's remember interdependency. So we should act together. We should have conversations to talk about the different subjects that are important in our societies. And we should not forget that we are one. And there is so much that we can learn from each other if we are ready and open to do so. And the last one, and for me is one of the most important ones, is to have opportunities to take the lead. This for me is pivotal. And I want to focus on young people here. I've worked in several countries, and I've seen many countries where young people are not allowed structurally to take the lead or to be in positions of power. And for me, this is alarming. Young people have much to offer, and this needs to be recognized by our societies and structures. So we both, young and older people, play a role in this. So on the other hand, when I've seen countries where youth has a place and where their drive and capacity are encouraged, these countries are ones that foster involvement in the development of communities. So last thing I want to say is that we as young people can start by raising our voice, building networks, as it was said at the beginning, how important it is to have a community. And we, young or older, share responsibility for our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Our next question is to Mr. Simon. Simon, can you tell us more about the peaceful civil resistance you were talking about? And how does this resistance bring an end to the conflict? And could you also talk about how this resistance remains peaceful?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I also want to talk about, like as you said, how peaceful civil resistance. When you read The Politics of Nonviolent Action by Gene Sharp, he calls it a technique designed to operate against opponents who are able and willing to use violent sanctions or actions. So it should really be understood, it should be evaluated, it should really be applied most effectively. As Dr. Carson says that civil resistance itself may not be enough, I agree with him, because when you do not organize, when you do not constantly evaluate, when you do not constantly kind of do what Dr. Leicester talks about when he's kind of summarizing the work of Gandhi, organizing, listening, analysis, mobilizing. I think these are very important things to help us to sustain a peaceful resistance. And this is what it actually means. Violence and violence against violence is reinforcing. When you decide to fight violence against violence, you're going to find a challenge. Violent action and non-violent action possess quite different mechanisms. And I want to share what, when Gandhi was comparing the two situations, Gandhi says that a man who violently strikes water with a sword, it's the man's arm which will be dislocated. Because when you constantly strike water using a sword, I mean, you're not cutting anything, but at the end of the day, it's your hand that is going to actually be dislocated. So you're going to find a problem with that. So peaceful civil resistance ends conflict when we mobilize people, when we organize, when we strategize, and we carry out a sequence of actions. And it can only remain peaceful when we constantly evaluate our struggle and actions. It is important to keep evaluating what we've done and how we've gone wrong. We also need to keep practicing the values of nonviolent discipline, solidarity, and this can be achieved in the long run and constantly through practicing it. You realize that values become part of us when we practice them, and when we practice them, they become our behaviors. So that's like very, very important. The second idea, the other idea of how civil resistance may remain peaceful is the state has a tendency of planting what we call provocateurs, or we call them state agents in our movements, especially in civil resistance movement that use peaceful, nonviolent action as their method. So these provocateurs work hard to disunite, to bring disunity and scandals. They disrupt effective strategic thinking, they lower participation, and they promote or engage in vandalism and violence that can be blamed on the movement. They want to paint a bad image on a movement that has chosen nonviolent actions because they want to disunite it. But as Eric Chanworth says in a book called Civil Resistance, that what everyone should know, that the ultimate aim of these agents is to banish public sympathy and support for the movement while giving government justification for heavy-handed tactics such as beating, mass arrests, coercions, intimidations, because the state wants to find an entry point on how to kind of destroy this movement. So it's important as movement leaders, as leaders of movements, organizers, reformers, rebels, as Bill Moyer says it in the Movement Action Plan, when he talks about the structure of leadership in a movement, that we kind of look at these things and take control of them so that we are able to kind of desist from these things. So I want to tell you that civil resistance can end conflict, a lot of conflict, when one, we maintain strong, cohesive, and decentralized network or membership. I want to agree with Dr. Carson and also Andrea said, we need to build networks. These movements survive on networks and numbers. Yeah, an interesting scenario is when Dr. Carson also went to a meeting and phoned 6 people and was asking themselves that, oh, are we able to change this kind of regime or to achieve the change we want? That exactly is the question that we ask ourselves, that it starts with me, keeping these values, organizing, changing, and then you keep attracting people to join your movement. If at all the movement cannot exercise some of these values of nonviolent discipline, of solidarity, of self-determination towards achieving a certain goal, I think it may be hard for it to achieve the kind of change that they need. So it's important for us to focus on these things as we use civil resistance and it to remain peaceful. Thank you very much. That's what I can contribute.
Thank you, Simon, for your insight. And at a personal level, I completely agree with you. And I also see that it's the means which determines the ends. While Dr. Carlson and Johnny Maxwell were talking about the greater harm, sometimes it's our measure to see that till this point of time the harm is done, but usually this violence of cause becomes the effect and the effect becomes the cause. So at some point of time we need to stop and step aside. So that's what I have come to see, and I completely agree that there can be a means to be peaceful. Thank you. Now our next question is to Jin. Jin, you spoke about climate change, and we'd like to know as to how do you think climate change is affecting the world peace? And what are the some steps you think youth can take to overcome the challenge?
Okay, thanks so much. I was joined to some similar organizations for the addressing climate change, and that time, youth has to use also the side, both sides, like the youth side and any other the civil society side, necessary to update to the protection for the to leading to the global peace. Likewise, to the as you know, to the likewise as you know, the Russia had already invaded the Ukraine, and also some of the some kind of some military conflict around the world still happen, likewise India and Pakistan and some other countries as well. That time, the climate change has to consider and approach to any other side of the consideration about the global peace for the security, energy security, and the national securities, and so on, especially for the protecting to the industries as well. So this time, as a youth can deliver the voice, not only for the enhancing to the energy transition, or try to reduce to the amount of the greenhouse gas emissions or so on, but also the need to deliver to some countermeasures with developing to their own technologies. Likewise, now recently some of the several companies, kind of some startup companies, use rate managed by the youth, so established into the China's, US, and Europe, and any other countries, strongly focus on about the transformation of the energy sectors and climate sectors as well, and they willing to selling to the making some collaborations. I mean, as a business partner with any other huge companies. So that's right. I think the youth have to transform or specialize to each topics, like with capacity buildings, developing technologies, and protect human rights, and focus on the education and so on. So youth have to equip to some specializations or some specialized knowledge, technology, and so on. Whereas looking to the climate change as a global peace for the company side or government side, nowadays, just until 2030, we need to reach to the Paris Agreement. But it's to reach at the Paris Agreement, we need to the three elements: the laws, finance, and capacity building. Capacity building, we had to be catching up to the many companies, and so we had to the youth and the company had to catching up to the company side, and the jobs and working as a digital transformation, and try to reach at SDGs as well. Whereas at the business side, just update to the latest data of the IPCC reports mentioned about this, just only the 11% of the finance can be provided for the companies, and we still need to the more than 40% of the finance. I mean that it's more than 4,000 million US dollars necessary to invest in the climate change, but still we could not reach out it. So that time we need to consider about how can we make the systems to accelerate to the more investigations, and try to investment to the more these kind of technology and capacity buildings, and make some collaboration with companies. So that's a point to the necessity for to getting more inclusions and cross-border to the actions for the climate change. Also, for the looking to the violence, likewise the climate change is strongly. It's hard to look into the actual impact. Likewise, just we can feel it, like in the summer seasons, we can see the many flows and
hello niggers, hello all niggers, 1 2 3
okay.
Niggers, don't mute me, niggers. And Asian niggers and Asian niggers. Hey niggers.
Thanks. And
Oh no, those aren't
okay.
good words.
It's fine. It's fine. And also, recently in the Asia Pacific countries, there's a huge drought and fraud, and it's strong damage to the finance. But still, we could not getting any of the damage of the finance and our life, daily life. So that time we need to we need to looking up to some of the report. We need to looking up to any of the news and some of the damage and what's the effect to our research and our industry and our life. So many civil citizens and the civil societies need to focus on getting more expanded the information network to know about what's going to be happen and what's the effect to our daily life based on the climate change and based on the global impact need to be considered about it. And lastly, based on I working to several years for the working to some climate issues agencies, and that time many of the youth, likewise the last years I was attending COP26, and also this year I was attending the SP56. We have some huge potential for the takes actions, invest, and some of the crossing the borders, which makes a collaboration to create a new values against the climate issues. So that time, each members can get and can consider to attack and to reach out to the more step forward to consider about the climate issues for the contributing to the global peace. So that's my brief point. Sorry for any inconvenience.
Thank you so much, Jen, for the insight and talking about the actions which both can be taken at a societal level and at an individual level by a youth. Thank you so much, Jen. Our next question is from Nicholas. And Nicholas, the question has two parts. The first one is, for people identifying with sections that are considered to be minorities who are facing injustice, do you believe that there is a way out of systematic oppression which could lead to a total change? It's the first question. If you want to answer this now, you can, and then we can move on to the second part of the question.
Sorry, you'd have to give me a minute. The comments made during the last presenter is very distressing to me. So you'd have to give me a minute or two.
Please take your time. And at the same time, we would first of all like to apologize for the actions of the person who had joined the call. And secondly, I've learned for myself at least to not identify with such words and do not let that knowledge come into the mind of the people, though it's really hurtful. But at the same time, I request people to not identify with such comments and let it enter your psyche. Thank you so much. And I appreciate how Jin took it on himself by just simply ignoring and moving forward. Thank you, Jin. Yes, Nicholas, you're on mute, sir.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
The first part, and if you could tell me the second part too.
All right. Yeah. For people identifying with sections that are considered to be minorities who are facing injustice, do you believe that there is a way out of systematic oppression which could lead to a total change? That's the first part of the question. Second question is, do you believe that till there are separate identifications with religion, ideas, ethnic backgrounds, nationality, color, causes, this division and conflict could end?
All right, so thank you. So the first part of that question, as it relates to a pathway forward for racialized people who are facing injustice, I think Dr. Johnny Mack answered that very eloquently earlier on when he said, there's the power resides with the people. The challenge is we're not owning that power base. We're highly divided on that power base and finding the common theme of recognizing if one of us is injured, then all of us are impacted by that. So I think the answer to that question is that if as a group, as a large group who are facing different injustices in different directions, but if we all stand together as a people, that would certainly help to address those injustices. Because let's talk about this for a second. If we're looking at one group that's impacted, if none of the other groups get involved, that's not my fight. I'm, supporting from a distance. Then those injustices are likely to continue. But if all of the groups get involved, then certainly the powers that be would have to listen, because there's that unified voice. And so for any group, if we all stand together on the issues impacting that group, there's a collaborative and collective effort that would certainly help on that. And on the second part of that question, Divish, you'll have to help me with that second question again.
Yes, sir. My question was that, do you believe, apologies. Yes, do you believe that there are separate identifications with religions, ideas, ethnic backgrounds, nationality, color, or any cause, the division and conflict could end?
Well, certainly the idea of religion and different religions have certainly divided us on all of these issues. Significantly, it has been used over generations, perhaps centuries, to divide us as a people. And I think if you remove that that common factor, it would perhaps bring us together on all of these common issues. And religion is such a sensitive issue, and it's so personal that it causes that effect on people. And it really, in my view, at least in my humble view, serves as a barrier in terms of bringing all of us together on common issues.
And if you will also like to talk about, just very quickly, like religion, similarly, when we talk about different races, different groups, different identities, it is still forming a group, and then comes division. So do you think that can lead to this conflict can never end till there are identifications to different groups?
Well, it's interesting, and I think, Divish, we have to start seeing each other as human beings, like the human race, right? And not as black or white or Asian, or we have to start seeing each other as human beings. I'm almost certain of this, that if you cut myself, or you cut you, Andrea, Simon, Jin, one color of blood is going to come out. Anybody dispute that? Nobody's disputing that, right? And that is a fact, that below our skin, we're all carrying the same blood, right? And that's red. So we have to start, and I think, if I understand this correctly, from a child, we're taught these biases. From a child growing up, you're taught which is better, and yours is better. And perhaps everyone is guilty of that, have preconceived notions about a certain group of people. And you internalize that growing up, and it becomes quite very much normal. So we have to retrain our minds, because you were trained into thinking a certain way. So we have to reverse that thinking and view everyone as human beings. And I think that's where we'll start making progress. Rather than viewing someone as a different race, view them as a human being.
Thank you, Nicholas. With this, we have come to the end of questions from our end. If there are any questions now from the audience, please, you can write your questions on the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can recognize the people to ask the questions. Okay, so Jen, do you have a question?
Yes, it's fine. Yes, I have. Just I like to leave the comment. And thank you, Nicholas. It's a great. That's your point is so great to consider about the mutual understanding. Even the human rights and protection for the violence and the focus on the climate change and any other topics, we need to get a mutual understanding. Just I like to say, and mutual understanding and try to cross the borders for the understanding each other's. Like the focus on the characteristic of each other's place, and also the focus on the areas, what we can do, what is the task, what is the issues, and we need to consider about their background. Even someone says something not good, but even so, maybe we need to step forward. We need to include it, and we need to accept it, the personality. So that's my comment. Thanks. Sorry for some distributions.
Thank you, Jen. We have Keshav has raised his hand. Keshav, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I actually want to ask all our panelists, who are coming in from different parts of the world with your own respective contexts. How can other young people from different parts, like all of us, unite together to create a global movement? While we create a global movement, also to provide some support to our local movements from wherever we are sitting in different parts of the world. So if I want to support Simon or Andrea, or if Ganga wants to support me in India, what are the two or one basic advice that you can give from your end? Anyone can take the question from the panel or multiple speakers. Thank you.
I think I can say something, if that's okay.
Yes, Simon.
I think all initiatives to build a youth movement, a young people movement, I think it's important for us to also look at one, inspiration. There is need for inspiration for young youth to care, to see that they should belong here. And I think inspiration can only come through the available content, the documentaries. I was happy when we had a rap song from that was presented by Dr. Who presented. So it's important that we have inspiration, because youth nowadays look at, oh, am I inspired to act? Am I inspired to join this? Then as we inspire them, it's important to also think about number two, capacity building, knowledge building, skill building. I think this is really going to be, and I think Jean talked about a lot in capacity building. So it's important that we keep building their capacity, one, to increase, to build their resilience, their spirit, their love, and all that. And then the last thing, because we believe that this is issues that affect Andrea, may affect me, issues that affect Nicholas may affect me. We all face similar issues. So we need to build solidarity among ourselves, solidarity among movements, solidarity among networks, among countries, so that we can learn the best practices. And also, when an issue happens to a friend, let's say Nicholas, I can write a statement, I can write a Twitter, I can do a campaign about it, just that I am in support of them. So those are my kind of things. So I summarize it as inspiration. Without inspiration, people remain idle. And without education, people may use non-effective means like violence. So we need to also educate people, and then later we need to have action, because without actions, nothing would really change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Nicholas?
Sure, thank you. I want to echo some of the sentiments made by Simon there. This forum and not only the working group, but the World House Project presents a phenomenal forum for us to change the world before us today. And I don't say so very lightly, because we have on this forum people, young people from around the world. Now, as Simon pointed out there, how powerful would that be if one of us is fighting for a challenge in their country, and you have organizations from around the world issuing statements of support, letting the relevant stakeholders and those in authority know that there's global support for this issue. There's one thing that governments do not like, and that goes to every country, is that people from other country telling them or condemning the actions in their country. And that's where we can work together to bring about whatever changes that we're seeking wherever we are in whatever part of the world. So I'd like to suggest for those of you who are new or here for the first time, that you get involved with the World House Project, and let's find ways to collaborate, to, as Simon put it, support each other wherever we are. It's a very important question, and the answer is right before us. You'll find it very useful and helpful to be able to engage in one place with people from around the world, working together.
Thank you, Nicholas. Andrea?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a very difficult question, how we can create a global movement. It's really, it's a big challenge. But I think we have many tools that can allow us to do that. I think simply considering social media and what we can do with it. Let's just think in practical terms. And in this sense, I would like to mention about there's this new book, Nonviolent Civil Resistance Tactics in the 21st Century, something like this it's called. It was also promoted by David Hart, who is here. And well, we basically can call it Nonviolent Tactics. And it's a list of hundreds of ideas of things we can do to get together and create positive social change. So this is just one practical thing. I can probably share it in the chat. And how can we add value to each other's movements? I think the first step is to identify what our talents and our passions are, so we know what we can offer to the world. So I'll just leave it like that.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Jim?
Okay, based on the answer to the questions, I would say maybe even whatever happened, like even these kinds of situation, how hard the situation faced, the youth cannot stop. Youth can step forward, and then also at least we can see many other persons here, and we can see the many other members hearing to our voices from around the world, and we also can expand our movement. So that time, I like to say, well, we can change the world. We can change with any violence. We can change any damage. We can change any other the movement, and we can create the new value as looking like to the Mahatma Gandhi, and then we can do it. We can do the looking for, and here we can get united and take solidarities and actions for the accessing all the issues around the world. So then, from here, we can start for the human rights. Well, we can start for the non-violence. That's an answer for my comment. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jen. Now I would like to invite Dr. Johnny Mack to give his remarks.
Well, thank you, Divish, and thanks to each of the panelists. You are incredibly inspiring. You know, when I'm a bit envious of you. When I was your age, we didn't have the access that you have. And Dr. Carson mentioned that in his opening remarks. We had very primitive, as we say it, tools. You know, we didn't even have cell phones. We had desk stationary phones. But you today have so much access. But what's more inspiring than that is your use of the access. And that's what I'm really hearing in this panel. Each of you in your own way are incredibly engaged and incredibly aware, and you represent a leadership that perhaps you haven't yourselves fully understood and embraced. But I am so encouraged by what I hear from you, Nicholas, and you, Andrea, and you, Jen, and you, Simon, and you know, all of you. I think joining the World House Project, creating your own networks, is the key here, and I hear that in your own presentations. And so, thank you very much for the leadership that you're providing, and please go on and on and on. And those of us who came before you will continue to support you and push you forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. At last, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers for sharing about their learnings and experiences from their own lives, and also for the work they do for being at peace and bringing peace into the world. I'd also like to thank the World House Project, Center on Democracy, Development and Rule of Law, Stanford University, and the DIAS for giving us the stage to create this forum for initiating this movement for change as a turning point. I'd also like to thank all our colleagues at the Turning Point Summit who have been working very hard to bring all of this together. A special acknowledgement of all the hard work which has been put in by Dr. Johnny Mack and Mr. Keshav Gupta. At last, members of the Youth Assembly, the audience, witnesses, and observers of the panel discussion. It is the individual which brings change into the society. And when you change, society changes. Society is nothing but our relationship with each other. We hope that we can bring change into our own lives and relationship and keep staying on this path of love, compassion, and peace like a loving rock, which is immovable, which doesn't fall into the river of cause and effect, which only has compassion and love to give. Thank you, everyone. Over to Keshav.
Thank you, Devesh, for moderating the panel. And once again, I think this has been deeply fulfilling, enriching, insightful, inspiring. I have a lot of emotions that I'm yet to process, and I think so much to unpack from this discussion over the coming days. So Andrea, Simon, Jin, Nicholas, you have been inspiring me ever since I've gotten to know you, and I think today's panel is a very little peek into the respective work and your thoughts. So we hope that we can continue to again do this more, as I was discussing this with Dr. Lester as well previously. And you're compelling us, I think, more and more to make sure that we do this more and more frequently with such an enriching discussion. I also just wanted to quickly address the interruptions that were made during the call. We should not ignore the importance of a safe space. So I think from both the Youth Working Group and the DIAS, we strongly condemn the words that were used by whoever it was, and it is our endeavor to make sure that this is a space which does not tolerate bullying, racism, and any untoward behavior towards any individual. So let me just deeply apologize to everyone. I don't think it was just offensive to one person or two people. I can say certainly that it was offensive to all of us at large. So and I think it has also taught us another lesson uh, that while there are good forces at work, there are equally terrible forces at work, and I think it only strengthens our resolve to continuously work harder, to be more uh, in the same direction and towards the end of love, as Dr. Mack was talking about Gandhiji, and harmony together. So I completely echo with the views that Nicholas had made, that we when if we cut ourselves, we all bleed red. So thank you, Nicholas, for making that point as well. So and as a forum, we highly once again condemn any such behavior, and no such behavior will be tolerated and is tolerated at the World House Project as well. So that's just something I wanted to conclude this panel with. And yeah, thank you everyone. Let that 2 seconds not overshine or outshine the 2.5 hours of absolutely inspiring things that we have been hearing. So thank you. Now we are moving to our final session for today, and I was thinking of doing like the session in a way that it would have been a one-way discussion, etc. But Dr. Carson's session has completely inspired me to rethink my session, which is compelling us all to think about how can we all shape a non-violent world. Uh, while we were planning this session, I think Dr. Mack and I went for a week. We went back and forth in even choosing the words on how do we title this session. What is the one action you will take to shape a non-violent world? What will you do to create a non-violent world? We were so concerned about ensuring that the emotion as well as the idea intentionality behind this session is articulated very accurately. Dr. Lester is leaving us, so Dr. Lester, heartiest gratitude to you for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
The
Sorry, I have to
opportunity
go.
was
My,
for us
fa-
to
my
listen to.
family is waiting for me
Yeah.
for
No,
Sunday.
thank you. And I can tell you, I'm already getting messages from everyone asking for the YouTube link to the song. So you have introduced something magical to all of us today on through your presentation.
Okay, I'll put it again in the chat before I leave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah. So the idea behind the final session was that we hear initially from Dr. Mack, Dr. Lester about non-violence. We hear from Dr. Carson. Then we hear from young people. And when I say young, let me add accomplished and inspiring as the two adjectives already to that. And then it was to how do we take individual leadership in our lives, in our communities. So that is the intent behind the session. What we will be doing is that I will be handing over to Dr. Mack uh, for his articulation on this issue. Thereafter, I will be sharing a Google Doc link with each of us in the Zoom chat. We have already emailed it to everyone, and some of you have been kind enough to also fill it already. And then we will have like a open house and interactive discussion on what is the one action that we can take from now towards shaping a non-violent and peaceful world. B, why have we done that? C, what kind of impact do we think that action will have on the community? So we will do it in the same style as Dr. Carson had led us to see today. And before we do that, so I'll invite Dr. Mack to just share his perspectives while we were planning the session. Dr. Mack, please.
Thank you, Keshav. Again, here, I think this wrap up is really about thinking how we can get involved and be effective, have real impact. By the way, Keshav, how much time do we have for this particular discussion?
About 30 minutes or so. We will be 35 minutes. Because I know that it's getting quite late in the Asian part of the world as well. So about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And just that the discussion we can do now, people can continue to fill the form until the summit is on. So there's no compulsion to fill the form right now. We can be focused on our discussion itself.
That's excellent. Thank you. I think that raises the question and pulls from our earlier discussions about what nonviolence is. And not everyone has to focus on a specific thing all the time and all the people on that thing. In other words, nonviolence can find expression in so many different ways. And I think it would be helpful, excuse me, I think it would be helpful if we talk about some of those ways, particularly if what we've said earlier about the direct and cultural and structural elements of nonviolence. If we think about what those might be, Andrea mentioned earlier that one of the places to start is to think about your own talents, your own experiences, and how can you use those talents and experiences to have an impact in your own community. I think these are some of the things that it would be helpful to share as a group. And I wonder if there are examples that participants would want to share. Remember now, Keshav said this is a dialogue, not a monologue.
We actually, Dr. Mack, we have some of our participants who've already filled the form. So maybe I could invite to get the discussion started, Ganga, Simon, Shardor, who've already filled the form to share their opinions, and everyone's welcome to again please weigh in.
Absolutely.
Hello. I guess I can start this discussion by saying like the thing that I have put on where they said like how I can change my own experiences, my own thoughts for leading a non-violent life could be that. For me, I feel like it would be educating myself even more, because right now I'm at the stage where I feel I'm not educated enough, or like I'm not aware. I don't have much awareness enough to, actually engage in a more profound speech or on a more profound, language that I could use to, lead this conversation. So for me personally, I would just like read books or articles, about all this. But like, as you said, Dr. Mack, about my experiences, my journey about nonviolence. For me personally, I do not have one, but I would say that from my family, especially my twin sister, when she was like very small, we for our schools, the classes, we were separated. So she experienced some bullying, and that I couldn't experience it. And I think that I wrote it in my document as well for starting an anti-bullying community at school. So I think that that strategy was encouraged by her, by my sister. So that's something that I always think about when it comes to violence, not just like a global situation, but as well as a individual situation, how individuals directly feel like they have been attacked. So that's something that I think about as well whenever I'm discussing about violence and how I can, reduce it, or at least, reduce violence. So that's where my stance are.
Ganga, that's you make so many important points here, and you had mentioned earlier an interest in forming a working group. That's another area of building capacity and bringing others into the conversation, both in your local community, but throughout the global community, because of the platform that the World House Project represents, as Dr. Carson indicated earlier, we're simply facilitators, and he has created this ecosystem for persons such as yourself to bring your conversation, your experience. That in itself has significance and impact. And so I would really encourage you to follow up on your thought about joining this current working group or creating your own, specifically focused on the subjects that are of interest to you. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on these issues.
Thank you, Dr. Mac. Your words really mean a lot to us, a lot of young people right here. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, thank you. By the way, your words mean far more to us as we listen to you and all the aspirations that you and your colleagues represent. So thank you.
Yeah.
Are there other thoughts? Hi, Sarah. I see your hand.
Hello, I'm first of all apologies for not being able to have a video intervention, unfortunately. It has been such an inspiring discussion, and of course I'm really glad to have this opportunity. Following back a little bit on what Ganga said earlier, I think that the first pillar into trying to understand how you can better promote a culture of nonviolence should be, first of all, educating yourself. So I'm also doing some personal research and some introspection into understanding better which are the triggers that engage society in violent actions, be them with words or direct violent attitudes. At a personal level, I'm currently developing this research in the protection against hate speech in crisis situation, and I'm trying to better understand how we can address this issue, including in the digital environment. From a professional perspective, of course, we are following. So for the other speakers that my speakers and listeners, and also other participants, I'm from Romania. I am working at the Romanian government as an advisor for the Secretary of State, Department for Interethnic Relations. I'm also an EDIN member, European Democratic Youth Network. So if I would join with these, which are interesting to have as an institutional part, and also from an activist perspective, but most of all from a youth perspective who is engaged into promoting, preserving, and engaging into human rights-based activities. I think that one of the key aspects that we should rely on is building strong networks that help us promote the same. So I'm trying to identify either if we are speaking in the institutional context, of course, shared mandates in this regard, or if we are relying on the non-governmental field, of course, mutual interest and areas of action. So to sum up a little bit, I think that a strong network, both offline and online in this context, is one of the keys, and also trying to understand which are the triggers that conduct to violent attitudes, and this includes educating yourself. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I hope it was just a little bit on the topic of the discussion for tonight. In Romania it is night, so for tonight's discussion. Thank you.
So thank you as well. I see Dr. Carson's hand. Before we recognize him, Nicholas had mentioned earlier about the possibility of networking to support issues within each of your countries. It's a very important way to show solidarity and to lend support from a global perspective, and I think that point should not be lost in our discussion here. Nicholas, you may want to come back and explain a little bit more about what you have in mind, but before that, Dr. Carson, did you? I see your hand.
Thank you, Johnny. I just wanted to make a comment that, I've been listening to the discussion and trying to look at it from, while preparing breakfast, by the way, for my wife. And it brought to mind something that came up in Bernard Lafayette. He's the freedom writer who we interviewed, and he did a film about his life, which we'd love to show you whenever you'd like to see it. But in any case, he said when he was first invited to come to James Lawson's workshop on nonviolence, his first response was, "I have enough work to do already." And he wants me to come to a workshop, and it sounds like work. And I think we're inviting people to be part of work groups. And maybe part of the hesitation there is many of us have enough work to do already without becoming part of a working group. And I think that it might be better just to use the term of community. Being part of a community does involve work sometimes, does involve pleasure sometimes, does involve friendships. And for me, the movement was all of those. That I didn't really separate it into what was work and what was play, what was important, what was distracting. All of those things were current. And I think that's when King is talking about the World House, he says it's an option of chaos or community. He didn't use the term nonviolence community, but the world as a community, where we see one another the way we should see the people around us, as a community of people that over time we can gain trust in and accomplish things together that we couldn't do apart.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of reminded of that poster, "Come, let us build a new world together." That's the general idea. And I think each person has to kind of make their own choice. Again, we want to just facilitate. Sometimes a community, we just had blocked off our street in the community where I live. And they do this every once in a while because people can live on the same street for many years without knowing who else lives on that street. But by doing that, we found that around the block, there's a person who does work that's very similar to me. And we promised to get back together, and we didn't know that we were living a block away. And so I think that maybe just broadening that notion of what does it mean? We're part of communities. This is simply another form of community. And the end goal is to build something that serves as a world community, not that everybody in it would be part of that, but that it would be accessible so that you're not excluding people from your community for the various obvious reasons that isolate, sometimes humiliate, exclude, but building inclusive community so that the newcomer is welcome. And I think that maybe just our terminology sometimes is off-putting, as if it does involve work, which many of us see as something. Do I get paid for that? And I think rather the reward is something other than pay.
Okay. Anyone want to respond to Dr. Carson's? Nick?
I think, thank you, Dr. Mack. I think Dr. Carson has raised an important point in how all of this is being presented. but I also think that there are common issues here. And if I back up a little bit, the perception or the idea of this will be extra work and we're all very, very busy in what we do. And it doesn't mean that we have to participate in every activity, but participating and getting involved in some way, as I said earlier, like every drop would eventually fill the bucket, right? So the key here, I think, is to get involved, figure out which areas are important and that are a priority to you, and dedicate a certain amount, a minimum amount of time to supporting those initiatives. And if we all do that, in many ways, we'll all be supporting each other at different ventures.
Yep.
So don't burn out. The idea is not to burn out yourself and try to get involved in everything. And but if we just do a little bit, all of us, then certainly, and be sure to repeat that, then it will, at some point, come back to you.
Nick, if I may, for the sake of this discussion, and Keshav, if we go too long and too far, interrupt here. But again, you said something very important, and it was about being engaged with each other on each other's issues using this platform. I wonder if you have some thinking about how that can happen, that can be adopted in a very practical way by this working group and by the network. And Keshav, you may have some thoughts as well about this.
Well, what that would look like, just to be clear, that question is directed to me and
Yes,
as
sir.
well as Keshav,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes. And those, how do we make this interaction practical? Because this is all about, remember, our discussion is about practical ways of making nonviolence, effective in our lives. But go ahead, please.
Well, I think as a starting point, as a group, through whatever mailbox or whatever, we can all submit issues that we're working on, right? And from that issue, we can post what all of those issues are, and people can say which issues they're interested in getting engaged in, and go at a micro level from there. So that way, people are voluntarily choosing what they want to. They're not feeling like they're pushed into a particular area, and I think that's the starting point.
I actually, what I'm getting at, Nick, is I'm aware that the project you're working on in Canada is one where global support, statements of global support could be helpful. I think that was your
Correct.
point.
Yes, yes.
And could you speak to how that might happen? I don't think you have to speak to your specific issue unless you desire, but I found it very intriguing, your call for, bringing people together to support common causes and showing that global solidarity.
Sure. In general, the work that I'm doing has a global impact because it, from a legal sense, it sets a major legal jurisprudence. But more importantly, it's inciting a global movement towards treating everyone equally, whether that's in their workplace or in their church or wherever that might be. So, for example, we just launched a historic complaint with the United Nations, something that has never been done before on the issue of anti-Black racism in Canada, particularly in workplaces. And what all of that does is that it applies significant pressure for the government to act on these issues. And if at the same time you have organizations from around the world issuing statements of support on that issue, it will eventually move the government to act. But more so, it sends a message to other governments how the world is united on these issues. And I think that can be a template to be utilized with whatever cause that's happening in our relevant countries or whatever issues that we're working on.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Or
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. Keshav, is there, in your thinking about the working group itself, and again, our subject is, making nonviolence practical in our lives. Do you see the working group as being the tool for the kind of thing that Keshav is, that Nicholas just spoke of?
Oh, certainly. I think I'll echo what you and Dr. Carson have already mentioned, that the World House Project and the working groups are ecosystems. How we use the ecosystem is the agency of that really lies with the leader who's proposing that how do we use that ecosystem. So I think being creative is a very important part of nonviolent action. Personally speaking, I think Gandhi also said that nonviolent action actually requires a lot of intelligence. Uh, anybody can pick up a weapon and start killing each other, but it takes more intelligence to find a nonviolent solution to a situation. I think that what Nicholas has talked about is absolutely fantastic at many levels, because today we are able to support what Nicholas is trying to do, and tomorrow we are able to bounce back that support to what Ganga is trying to do. And then tomorrow, if I have an issue at my, when I say my, I mean to say in India, for instance, where I am based, we can write to the high commissions of our respective, because every country has a high commission or an embassy. So you sometimes find that you may not know, can we all write to Prime Minister Trudeau? No, but we can write to the Canadian High Commission of New Delhi to convey that we do have a position on the issue. And I think more often than not, it's the recognition of what is good and bad that is missing to begin with, where people are just silent spectators. So even the fact that we raise our voices and say, yes, we also think that what Nicholas is facing or working for in Canada is not only relevant at a human being level, but tomorrow or today in some form or shape it is also relevant to me in my area. It is something that's extremely important. At a pragmatic level, of course, what Nicholas has said is very important. And I think the jurisprudence of what also the jurisprudence asks. I am a lawyer from a former life myself. So the jurisprudence implications of what Nicholas is talking about in administrative law can have a far-reaching consequence, because what Nicholas has talked about is in a Commonwealth state, and all of us are coming. When I say us, I mean including India. A lot of us are coming from a common law system, which means that the moment there is a tremendous Supreme Court decision in Canada, I can file a similar petition to within India as well, citing the same reference, a precedent from there. Like in earlier times, we used to have Privy Council of the UK, to which Supreme Court of India was also citing precedents towards while deciding cases. So even within, and I think that, like, when we say youth working group, it does not mean that it is only some issue of youth. Within that space, if young people want to see how advocacy works in Canada and how advocacy can potentially work on a climate petition in India, Nicholas's experience with public litigation can also help Ganga, for instance, take a similar petition on climate. So I think it's not just about the topicality of the issue, it is also about the medium of intervention where we can exchange knowledge with each other and really actually enable each other towards action. So that's just my 2 cents on it. And I think last thing, like, we can take inspiration from Gandhi ji and Dr. King, how these methods were like indigenized, customized, tailor-made, and contextualized by each leader from some time or the other to apply to their own circumstances. So Thank you. Over to you, Nicholas. Saying something.
Sure. I just wanted to circle back on how you've connected that, and it's exactly how we can utilize our different experiences and advocate and join the advocacy for each other, because they're all connected in some way or the other without us even knowing. The mere fact that we're all here together today to talk about these issues, I think that represents a significant turning point for each of us without us even noticing that today. But you got me fired up, is what I'm really saying.
I think maybe, like, for instance, if I'm just citing a practical example, if the youth working group were to organize a talk by Nicholas on how can advocacy happen through litigation, and let's say that we get Ganga and Jin, and I know Sarah is also a lawyer. So we divide our responsibilities. Some of us can be mobilizers who are inviting young people to the workshop. Some of us could be facilitators who are facilitating that session. So it's not just about recognizing the expertise of each other, but how that can come together in a larger picture. Only then can we utilize our diversity to our advantage. When I say diversity, I mean also of expertise, also of our respective skills. Like, for instance, some of us don't know how to operate Zoom. So a young person who can operate Canva for basic design work, Zoom, is actually sometimes a much more helpful person to me in my organization than a PhD who can articulate a view which is already articulated by somebody else. So it's also about, I think Dr. King talked about mutuality of our existence. So I think recognizing that mutuality, and anyone who's working in a smaller team with an organization can tell you the importance of a video editor, the importance of a designer, the importance of just somebody writing tirelessly emails to people. So sometimes we think that it's the person holding the mic who is the rock star, but to me, 10 years of my work, I've realized that it's everybody on whose shoulders that person is finally standing with the mic is the real rock star, and all due credits to that leader as well. But that leadership we have to change our perspective how we see leadership itself.
Keshav, Dr. Carson mentioned earlier, or said something earlier about being an activist in your own space, in your own work. And some of us may have interpreted that as, being a person who's protesting on the job, so to speak. But here you're offering ideas about how nonviolence can manifest in many different ways, and we can be an activist in our own environments, in our work, in our social life, and that speaks to the cultural and systemic aspects, structural aspects of nonviolence as well. So this is really great. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to refer to what Carolyn, our colleague from one of the working groups, Carolyn Whitcomb, is talking about, the World House Global Networks, the hub, the technical
Yes.
hub that has just been developed. So I think, Dr. Mack, if you would also like to just tell everyone about that as a collaborative tool, I think it's a very strong example for collaboration.
It is indeed. As we've repeated many times, the World House Project is a platform, and we're simply facilitating and offering this platform for persons to exercise, their commitment to nonviolence in so many different ways. And one of those is a hub or a portal that members or collaborators who join the World House Project network can access. It operates very much like I'm sorry. It operates very much like LinkedIn or any other portal or hub where you can share information, you can communicate directly, individually or in groups. And again, we encourage each of you, if you're not already part of the World House Project and the World House Global Network, to join, and you'll have access then to the portal and the hub. and you can continue this conversation using that tool. And I think that is what our colleague Dr. Carolyn Whitcomb was referencing.
Dr. Mack, do you think that we should also invite comments from Nikhil, Jin, David Hart, like all our other colleagues who've been, and Blair, who've been very patiently listening to all the speakers? I think it'll be fantastic to hear everybody else before we go to our concluding remarks.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thanks a lot for this first day. I was really, really impressed, and I felt good, and had a nice conversation on the DM line with David Hart, and I was, it's a learning process of what I'm learning about Ukraine, and I have different opinions from David Hart, but nonetheless, it was nice to share ideas and thoughts, and we're both hopefully going through a learning process. It is a learning process, as life can be. And I, interestingly, with the speaker who, you know, the guest who came in, who was asked to leave, you know, I used to be a little bit more hostile to people like that. And it was really interesting today that just in being at this meeting today and what I'm hoping for this week, what all the good things that can accomplish is just seeds of what can be placed inside us and understood about how we can work and think and have people to rely on in working towards good goals. I instantly went to kind of a different mode of thinking of how to ask questions of what that person was doing. And, you know, his actions were incredibly rude and kind of not, I don't know the word intolerable, but just not acceptable for this sort of forum. And how do we, you know, create our own space and keep our own boundaries and yet still express to him just, you know, care and concern that he can offer a bit more of his better self than what he offered. And how can we draw that out of him? You know, so he doesn't feel bad, we don't feel bad, and we can, I don't know, obviously there's important lessons we're trying to learn and that he can understand, but he then tries to explode the situation. And how do we bring him back and say, you know, try again, guy, you're not going to fully want to be a part of our group, but take what you can. And how exactly do we instill that in him, and or offer, or, you know, just offer some sort of good words of encouragement that for that sort of situation. And that's what I got out of what happened, and it just felt good in thinking about it today. And thank you also for the words of Dr. Carson, who just gave me a lot to think about. And thanks again just for this whole meetings this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Others who haven't spoken wish to.
I would like to, you know, give some comments. First off, I would like to thank every single one of the speakers who are here. It has been an absolutely great of a meeting. I feel like so blessed and so happy that I got introduced to this. Like, the person who I was in September, that has been completely changed. Like, I used to be a 16-year-old, I believe, like very normal among the people of my age, and I did not know and understand the entire principles of what non-violence actually is. And I do agree with every single one, and every single young person has said here, we have a lot to learn. We indeed do have a lot to learn. But what I also believe is true is that we have a lot to teach. Being 16-year-old, I can understand that I still need to learn a lot, but I also know that I now have some of the information which my peers or people younger to me do not know. And when it comes to things which we all can do in order to make sure that our future societies are better, I feel that we should learn first off, and even while we're learning and before we're learning, learn to communicate the information to others. what I essentially want to tell everyone here is that I wish that I could be the Dr. Johnny Mac for my peers, my friends, or my colleagues, be the Dr. Claiborne Carson for everyone here, or be like any single one of these exceptional speakers, I have to say. I want to be an organizer like Mr. Keshav Gupta, who has, banded this all together from different corners of the world. Because, this actually proves how we can lead a global movement. I would have never imagined that a professor, a Stanford professor from America, would join me, a kid in India, and I would have someone on my panel, a brilliant lawyer from Romania, or someone from Uganda, or someone from Canada leading a class action lawsuit. So, this actually proves to us the power of what we can do as a whole and how much we can accomplish. I promise I will try to spread this all among my colleagues. I will go to my institution. I will have a speak with my principal that I do want to address this in an assembly. And yes, I will try and communicate everything which I've learned and which I'm going to learn in this following week. And try to pass it off to my colleagues so that essentially we can make the world a better place. Because as I said, people who are in positions of power right now, they are going to be replaced. They're bound to be replaced. Power belongs to the future, and I envision that even if I could, change just one peg of that power and guide it towards what non-violence actually means and guide it towards what the greater good actually is, I would feel really accomplished. And yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. You're already a leader.
Could I personally invite you to join us on Mondays if it works out on your schedule?
Yeah, of course, sir. Of course.
Yeah. Love to see you there.
Same, sir. Same.
Okay. How are we doing, Keshav, with time?
We have just passed our 1 minute past our official time, and I think Nikhil has already made the summary remarks for me. Whatever I would have said, he has already said those things. So I request everyone to just also be able to fill the form. In the form that we have shared, we have also asked this important question that would you be willing to track the progress on your one action with us round the year? So I think a lot of people have already said yes to that. So I think that can become following up just on that. Those committed actions can be a very strong way to see the consistency of the effort, not just the effort itself. Let me just, in conclusion of today's day, say that I was very nervous when all of this was beginning, that, Zoom can crash, my internet can crash, there can be a power cut, but none of that happened. We were wondering if Dr. Carson would be up in time. He was the first one to join the call like half an hour in advance. And so many things could have gone wrong in today's meeting, but nothing did, which shows that there's something much greater at play here while we are celebrating Gandhiji's birthday and the International Day of Non-Violence. I think it's also this day's conclusion and Nikhil's remarks. They are really a tribute to what the World House Project sort of envisions, if I can speak on behalf of that, because it is a 1-year anniversary of the World House Project itself. So I think what Nikhil has said sort of represents in a way the vision that is being realized from Dr. Carson, Dr. Mack, Mr. Prasad, everyone who was involved in envisioning the World House Project, the global network itself. So it gives me a great sort of pleasure, I feel very fulfilled that we are able to create this summit together. And this is just the day one, guys. So we have the declaration tomorrow. I request everyone to join in tomorrow at the same time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. And just my last message to our young leaders: you are the holders of the power. Honestly, you have the power already. So please do not go back thinking that you will get the power at some time. The power is already yours, and we are also inspired by you. Like I said, I could not have dreamt of speaking before such an august gathering, even 5 years back. So when I was 25. So I think Nikhil, Ganga, all of you, you have really made it worthwhile for us to have this summit. And just my thank you to all our speakers, our moderators, Mike, Selby, Devesh, our speakers, Dr. Lester, Dr. Mac, Dr. Carson, Nicholas, Simon, Jin, Andrea, everyone who's made everyone who's made the intervention so far, every question that was mentioned, every thought that was put on chat, and we'll be following up on each of what you've mentioned. Plenty for us to take away from today and reflect on. And just I think finally, this youth working group, the vision was not just to have a group, but create action from that group. And you are, through this entire discourse today, laying out a roadmap for us. I read a wonderful quote with which I'll be closing today, that Gandhiji had said. He said, "There is no pathway to peace. The path, I think he said, peace is the path." So, with those words, thank you so much once again, and hope you have a wonderful 2nd October Gandhi Jayanti ahead of you. Thank you.
Thank you.